tell you one of my favorite wet flies. This is called a bouncer, and this is a fly that one of the first wet flies I tied many years ago when I started fly tying and getting into the wet flies, which I think are some of the most elegant flies. Anyway, it's a very simple pattern because it has all the standard pieces and parts of a lot of wet flies. The only interesting thing on this is the tag at the back right here is made of floss and not like a gold tinsel or anything. Pretty straightforward to tie the bouncer. There's nothing really complicated about it. It's a nice fall pattern. I like the colors of it. I've had very good luck with panfish on this and even some smallmouth in larger sizes. So that's the bouncer. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm going to start the bouncer by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 33.99 in a size 8. I'm going to debarb the hook. Because of the because of the orange tag on this, I'm going to start with a white thread. I'm using a Danville 6/0 in white. I'm going to go ahead and put some wax on my thread. This is just going to help give me a little bit more grip for the materials, especially with the floss. I'm going to start my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to advance it down the hook shank to just past the barb. Just past the point of the hook. Like I said, the tag on the bouncer is just some orange floss. I'm using some orange 4-strand Danville Rayon floss. I'm only going to use 3 strands of this. I really only need 2 on this size hook. If I were to use all 4, it would kind of bulk it up a little bit more, which you could, but I like it a little bit thinner. But 2 of these strands are going to go for the tag, and then the 3rd strand is actually security. I'm going to bring those up underneath the thread, setting them down just on my side of the hook shank, and pull those down. Really want those to be just the length of the body. Gives me a nice solid underbody here. I want to wrap my thread down the bend of the hook, binding. You want to make certain that floss stays right on top of the hook shank to where my thread is just past the barb. Then I'm going to bring it back, and I want to keep these in touching turns as best I can because that's just going to keep it a nice smooth underbody for that tag. I'm going to stop right at the end of the hook shank, which is pretty much right between the point of the hook and the barb. I'm going to grab 2 strands and start to wrap those in as the tag. I'm leaving this 3rd as a security. Bring those around. You can have those overlap just a little bit. You don't want this to be a real thick tag. It's just going to be fairly short, about 3 wraps forward. I'm just about almost to the point of the hook. 3 wraps in to secure it. And then I'm going to trim the excess, just the length of the body. The 3rd strand, as I mentioned, is for security because these strands right here, if there's nothing there holding them in place as they get touched and used while you tie them in or you catch fish, these strands will actually start to, I don't want to say unravel, but they just advance themselves all the way down the bend of the hook. And I learned this the hard way. Like I said, the bouncer was one of the first wet flies that I ever tied many years ago, and I didn't know about this little trick of tying in an extra strand of floss as security. And sure enough, on the first few of them, I tied them in. They looked great, but as soon as I started handling them, all of a sudden this floss just starts going right down the bend of the hook. So you just take this and bring it right over on the top, and this is the reason you wanted to make certain that when you bound the floss down, it all stayed right on top of the hook shank. And I will trim this also the length of the body. The rib on the bouncer is a gold tinsel. I'm using a silver and gold Danville 16 and 18. Doesn't take much, maybe just a few inches. I'm going to attach this with the silver side up. I'm going to bring it around to the underside of the hook and pull it back so that the end is just inside the body. Got one strand of floss kind of hanging out there. One wrap to bind that in. You want to be careful. If you put too many wraps on the back end here, you're going to end up with a little bit of a bump in your body, and you want to try and keep it as smooth as possible. The body on the bouncer is just a black floss. I'm using another, the same basically Danville 4-strand Rayon, but I'm only tying in 2 strands. So I'll bring that under the thread over to my side and right underneath. Again, pulling that to my left so that the end comes just inside the length of the body. Now, before I wrap the body on, I'm going to put some more wax on my thread. This just helps to grip it and all of it hold together a little more solid. You do want to advance your thread forward and try to keep nice touching turns. If you do find yourself, for whatever reason, at one spot putting in a few extra turns of thread, you might want to unwind it and go over it again, just because you don't want to end up with any little bumps that will actually translate up into the body through this floss. Now I'm going to go ahead and wrap the floss on. I want to make certain I cover all the thread wraps back here. I'll tie that in behind the eye of the hook. Let me add a little bit more wax just to give me a little bit more grip. And then I'll apply my rib. All tied in, I'm now going to change over to my black thread. Could have actually changed even from white to black back here. Might have added a little bit more thread wraps than you needed, but really the black is just because I want to have it finished with a nice black head. I'm going to apply some wax to my thread first. That backwards over the white as well as the tag of the black. Trim away the excess and advance back to about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. That's where I'm going to tie in the throat. The bouncer has a throat of orange hackle. I'm going to use some Schlappen. If you've got some rooster saddle, that would be fine, or something even a little bit softer. But I'm just going to use some Schlappen. I'm going to peel off a little bit from each side of this feather, matching those up. Putting those back together so that I have just a nice little slip of Schlappen Hackle. Measure that. I like the tips to go about halfway into the gap of the hook. Upside down pinch wrap to tie that in. Make certain when you are done tying that in that your thread is still good eye length behind the eye of the hook. That should be just right on the bottom side of the hook. You can nudge that around a little bit with your thumbnail, get it nice and even. Trim away the excess. We come forward just a few wraps to clean that up. A little bit more wax. And my thread is sitting a good eye length behind the eye of the hook. The wing is some yellow duck. This is some duck quill that I'm going to use to make the wing of this. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to cut. I want the width to be not quite the gap of the hook, maybe a little bit less. So I'll cut a little from each side here. Peel that off, flip the feather over, match the tips, peel off the other side. Now I have my matched wing. Fiddle with it a little bit to make certain that the tips are nice and even. Plus, if I have a little bit more on one side, which I think my side has just one or two barbs extra than the other, so I'm just going to take a couple or one of those out. End up getting one on both sides there. Just take your time. That's half the fun of these flies, is just taking your time with it and making certain that the wings and the body and everything's just the way you want it. I tie the wing in. I want the tip of the wing to be maybe about a quarter to half a shank behind the bend. It's not super long. Pinch those together on top, and a little pinch and loop. We'll pull that down. Get a couple, 2-3 wraps in there, and then we'll open up to take a look. Should be nice and uniform on both sides. Trim away the excess. A little bit more wax. Now I'll come down to the eye of the hook and start wrapping backwards to form the head. Remember, the head of the fly has two purposes. One is to cover up the butt ends of any material that is tied in up towards the eye. The second is just to give the fly a nice taper from the body down to the eye of the hook. Should have everything covered up. It's not critical because I'm going to be putting 2 coats of black lacquer on here to finish this. So even if I had a little bit of yellow poking through a couple thread wraps, it's not that critical. I'm going to flatten out my thread. And then I'll put in a 8 or 9 turn whip finish. Cut away my thread, and the bouncer is done. Some head cement on both sides of the head just to soak in. This fly tight will just soak right in. Seal up the head real well. And in a few minutes, when that is dry, I will come back and put a couple of coats of black lacquer on that to finish the fly off. So, as I said, the bouncer's a simple pattern. The only tricky part is the tag. But as long as you remember to have that extra strand of floss in there wrapped in as a security measure, it's really not that difficult. Just like a lot of wet flies, it has all the common pieces and parts in terms of the throat, the wing, ribbed body, and the floss and everything. Just a fun fly. Like I said, it was one of the first wet flies I ever tied because it was very simple. Still like it very much. It's a great little warm water panfish, smallmouth fly, and in larger sizes. And obviously it's been around for a while, so it's a good trout fly. So that's the bouncer. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.